I'll never forget the first time I met Jack. I was 25 and he was just a boy, only 14. My mom decided to take him in after hearing his story from a family friend. Things at home weren't great for him. An understatement, really. His mother struggled with her own demons, and his father was absent, both physically and emotionally. Mom, with her endlessly compassionate heart, opened our home to him. At the time, I thought it was a generous gesture, but I didn't realize how much it would change both of our lives. He was so quiet at first. I remember him shuffling through the doorway with a duffel bag slung over his thin shoulder, his eyes downcast. He barely spoke during that first dinner, except to mutter a polite thank you when Mom passed him the salad. I felt an urge to talk to him, to coax out something, anything, but I didn't push. He seemed like a skittish animal that might bolt at the slightest wrong move. It didn't take long for his walls to start coming down, though maybe it was because Mom treated him like he was one of her own from day one. Or maybe it was the quiet assurance that came from knowing he had a stable roof over his head. He began to open up in small ways. A shy smile here, a soft laugh there. I'll never forget the first time I heard him really laugh. It was over a silly joke I'd made while we were watching some superhero movie. It was the kind of laugh that bubbles up, unbidden and contagious. It lit up his entire face, and in that moment, I saw something in him I hadn't noticed before, a spark of resilience. Over time, we found ourselves spending more time together. It started with small things. I'd come home from work, and he'd already set up a game on the PlayStation, waiting for me to join him. We'd sit cross-legged on the living room floor, controllers in hand, trash-talking each other over virtual soccer matches. Or we'd marathon movies late into the night, passing bowls of popcorn back and forth until we were both too tired to keep our eyes open. It wasn't just the activities, it was the quiet comfort of his presence. He was like the younger brother I never had, and yet, he wasn't. Fast forward 5 years. It's funny, isn't it? How time has a way of sneaking past you when you're not paying attention. I'm 30 now, and Jack's 19. The shy, quiet boy who once hesitated to speak at the dinner table has grown into a confident, self-assured young man. He's taller than me now, his shoulders broader, his jawline more defined. Sometimes when I glance at him, I catch myself wondering when exactly he stopped being a kid and became this. We still live under the same roof. Mom loves having him around. He's like the son she never had. And honestly, I love having him around too. He's like my anchor in this ever-changing world, someone who knows me better than anyone else. But lately, something has shifted between us. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. I first noticed it during one of our usual gaming nights. We were playing some fast-paced shooter game, the kind that required quick reflexes and constant banter. I just managed to pull off a ridiculous move, and I turned to him with a triumphant grin. That's when I saw it, that look. It was fleeting, just a flicker in his eyes before he masked it with his usual smirk. But it stayed with me. It was a look of admiration. No, that wasn't quite it. Reverence, maybe. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it made my stomach flutter in a way I wasn't prepared for. Since then, there have been other moments. Little things, like the way his hugs linger a second longer than they used to, or the way his gaze softens when he talks to me, as if I'm the only person in the world who matters. Sometimes I catch him watching me when he thinks I'm not looking. It's not creepy or uncomfortable, far from it. It's warm and gentle, like he's memorizing every detail of my face. I try to tell myself it's nothing, that I'm imagining things. But the truth is, I've felt it too. A shift. A subtle but undeniable pull that wasn't there before. And it scares me. It confuses me. Because Jack isn't just some guy I met at a coffee shop or a coworker I've been flirting with. He's Jack, the boy Mom took in, my stepbrother, my closest friend. But when I'm with him, I feel it, the way my heart beats a little faster, the way my thoughts drift to him, even when he's not around. And that realization terrifies me as much as it thrills me. Because I don't know what this is or what it means. All I know is that things are different now, and there's no going back. At first, I brushed it off. I told myself it was nothing. I mean, it's Jack. Jack, the boy who used to sit at our dinner table, barely speaking above a whisper. The kid who came into our lives with too much baggage for someone so young. How could I even entertain the thought that there might be something more between us? It felt absurd, even wrong. I tried to rationalize everything, the lingering hugs, the soft glances, the way my chest tightened whenever he looked at me like that. But the thing is, I started feeling it too. At first, it was easy to dismiss. A momentary flutter in my chest, a fleeting thought I could wave away like a passing breeze. But then those moments started piling up, stacking on top of one another until they were impossible to ignore. I didn't want to admit it, though. Not to myself, and definitely not to him. It was too complicated, too messy. The stakes felt too high, and I wasn't sure I was ready to deal with what it all meant. One evening, I was curled up in my room after a long day. My phone was propped against my knees, and I was deeply engrossed in some movie for adults. The room was dimly lit by the soft glow of my bedside lamp, and I was cocooned in my favorite blanket, my little bubble of comfort. That's when Jack walked in. He didn't knock, just strolled in like he owned the place. My heart jumped into my throat as I scrambled to adjust the blanket around me, feeling oddly exposed. "Jack," I gasped, glaring at him. "Ever heard of knocking?" He just grinned, that boyish, infuriatingly charming grin of his. "Relax, Evelyn. What are you watching?" I narrowed my eyes at him, debating whether to kick him out or let him stay. But then he tilted his head, his expression softening in a way that made my resolve crumble. "Can I watch with you?" he asked, his voice quieter this time. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the pause button on my phone. Finally, I sighed and scooted over, patting the space next to me. "Fine, just don't talk through the good parts." He climbed onto the bed beside me, his body warm and solid as he settled against the pillows. I tried to focus on the show, but I could feel him beside me, his shoulder brushing mine, the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the air. It was distracting in a way that made me nervous, like my senses were suddenly hyper-aware of every little detail. For a while, we just watched in silence. But then, I don't even know how it happened. He turned to me. Our eyes met, and the world seemed to tilt. It wasn't a sudden move, more like a slow, inevitable pull. His gaze flicked to my lips, and before I could overthink it, he leaned in. And I let him. The first brush of his lips against mine was soft, almost hesitant, as if he was testing the waters. But then something shifted. The hesitation melted away, replaced by a quiet intensity that made my heart race and my thoughts scatter. His hand came up to cup my cheek, his touch warm and grounding, and I found myself leaning into him, completely lost in the moment. The kiss deepened, and my nerves lit up like a live wire. It wasn't just a kiss. It was everything unspoken between us, every glance, every lingering touch, every unacknowledged feeling bursting to the surface all at once. My blanket slipped from my shoulders, pulling around my waist, but I didn't care. All I could think about was the way his lips felt on mine, the way his fingers threaded through my hair. And then, just as the moment was building into something more, we were jolted back to reality. "Dinner's ready." Mom's voice rang out from downstairs, startling us both. We broke apart, our breaths mingling in the small space between us. My face was burning, and my heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I stared at him, wide-eyed and stunned, my mind a chaotic mess of emotions. Jack, on the other hand, looked calm, too calm. There was a slight curve to his lips, almost smug, as if he knew exactly what he was doing. That confidence, that ease, made me feel even more unsteady. "I guess we should go," he said casually, sliding off the bed like nothing had happened. I sat there for a moment, frozen, my fingers still clutching the edge of my blanket. What just happened? My mind screamed at me, but no answers came. At dinner, I could barely focus. My appetite was non-existent, and I kept replaying the kiss in my head, analyzing every second of it. I felt self-conscious under Mom's oblivious chatter, like the kiss was written all over my face for her to see. Jack, on the other hand, seemed completely unbothered, chatting with Mom like it was any other day. But for me, it wasn't just any other day. It was the day everything changed. And the scariest part, I didn't regret it. Not one bit. That night, I couldn't sleep. The weight of what had happened pressed down on me like a heavy blanket, making it impossible to find peace. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as thoughts of Jack swirled in my mind. His face, his smile, the feel of his lips against mine. It was all so vivid, like a reel playing on loop. My heart twisted with equal parts longing and confusion. How could something so simple as a kiss throw my entire world off balance? And why did it feel so right? I kept turning over the possibilities, the what-ifs, the endless questions that seemed to have no answers. Was I reading too much into it? Or was this the start of something real, something neither of us had the courage to admit before? By morning, I had made a decision. I couldn't let this hang in limbo any longer, couldn't let the uncertainty consume me. If there was something between us, I needed to know. I needed to face it head-on. After breakfast, I found Jack lounging on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He looked so at ease, so effortlessly handsome in his casual jeans and t-shirt. For a moment, I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. But then he glanced up at me, his eyes soft and warm, and I felt a flicker of courage. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you want to go to the movies later? Just the two of us." His eyebrows lifted slightly, and a slow smile spread across his face. "Yeah, sure. What time?" We agreed on an afternoon show, something low-key, but my heart was racing long before we even left the house. I spent far too long picking out an outfit, second-guessing every choice, until I finally settled on a casual dress that felt just right. Not too much, not too little. When we got to the theater, it felt like any other outing at first. We bought popcorn, joked about the ridiculous posters, and settled into our seats. But as the lights dimmed and the movie started, the energy between us shifted. At first, our hands rested on the armrest, inches apart. I told myself to focus on the screen, but the magnetic pull was impossible to ignore. Slowly, tentatively, his fingers brushed against mine. My breath hitched, and I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye. He wasn't looking at me, his gaze fixed on the screen, but there was a small, knowing smile tugging at his lips. I turned my hand over, letting my palm meet his. His fingers laced through mine, warm and steady, and a jolt of electricity shot through me. It felt so natural, so effortless, as if this was where our hands had always belonged. As the movie went on, we leaned closer to each other, our shoulders brushing, our breaths mingling in the dim light. At one point, during a quiet moment in the film, he turned to me, and our eyes met. The next thing I knew, his lips were on mine again, soft and searching. It was quick, a stolen kiss in the dark, but it left me breathless. We kissed a few more times, brief and light, as if testing the boundaries of this new, fragile connection. Each kiss sent my heart racing, and by the time the credits rolled, I was completely swept up in him. Outside the theater, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. We walked side by side, our hands still intertwined, as if letting go wasn't an option. "I don't want this to end," I said softly, surprising even myself with the admission. Jack stopped walking and turned to face me, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I wondered if I'd said too much, but then he smiled, a slow, genuine smile that made my knees weak. "It doesn't have to," he said simply. I hesitated, biting my lip as 100 thoughts raced through my mind. But then, in a rush of bravery, I told him the truth. "I booked a hotel room nearby," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked surprised when I mentioned the hotel, his brows lifting ever so slightly. For a moment, I thought he might question it, or worse, say no. But instead, he gave a small nod, his lips curving into a faint, almost shy smile. "Okay," he said, his voice steady, but tinged with something I couldn't quite place, excitement, maybe, or anticipation. As we walked toward the hotel, the air between us was electric, charged with an energy I'd never felt before. Neither of us said much, but his hand in mine spoke volumes. It felt warm, steady, grounding, like a silent promise that whatever this was, we were in it together. The elevator ride to the room was quiet, almost tense. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, every breath I took seeming louder than it should. I glanced at him, catching his reflection in the mirrored elevator walls. His jaw was set, his eyes focused straight ahead, but there was a softness in his expression, a hint of vulnerability that made my chest tighten. When we finally stepped into the room, the door clicked shut behind us, and the world outside seemed to disappear. The silence was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke of things yet to be said, yet to be done. I turned to him, my pulse racing, and before I could second-guess myself, he closed the distance between us. His kiss was different this time, urgent but deliberate, as if he'd been holding back for years and couldn't wait a second longer. His hands cupped my face, his thumbs brushing against my cheeks with a tenderness that made my heart ache. It was like he was memorizing me, committing every curve, every detail to memory. I felt the wall against my back before I even realized we were moving. His lips trailed from my mouth to my jaw, then to my neck, each kiss sending shivers down my spine. His hands followed, exploring with a confidence that surprised me. I should have felt nervous, maybe even self-conscious, but with him, it was impossible. He made me feel beautiful, like I was the only thing that mattered in the entire world. It wasn't rushed or awkward, the way I'd feared it might be. Instead, it was slow, deliberate, and filled with a passion that left me breathless. Every touch, every kiss, felt like a declaration, a silent confession of feelings we'd kept buried for far too long. We didn't stop at just kissing, though. His gentle touches ran over my body. I felt him with my whole body, and even more, he was rude, but I liked it. He was so incredible, it was like he had done it hundreds of times. The night unfolded like a dream, each moment blending seamlessly into the next. We laughed, we talked, we kissed until our lips were sore, and when words weren't enough, we let our actions speak for us. By the time the sun began to rise, painting the room in soft hues of gold and pink, I felt like I was floating. Lying beside him, my head on his chest, I could hear the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. It was soothing, grounding, and I found myself smiling despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling within me. For the first time in a long time, everything felt right. When we finally left the hotel and headed home, the world felt brighter somehow. Every step we took, every glance we shared, carried a newfound intimacy, a bond that felt unshakable. But as we approached the house, reality came crashing back in. "What do we tell them?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jack glanced at me, a small playful grin tugging at his lips. "That we were at a party," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. I blinked at him, half expecting him to laugh and admit he was joking. But when he didn't, I couldn't help but smile. "You think they'll believe that?" "Why wouldn't they?" He replied with a shrug. "We're not exactly the wildest people they know. A party sounds believable enough." He had a point. Mom and Dad weren't the type to pry, and the thought of them interrogating us about our night was almost laughable. Still, the idea of lying, even about something as small as this, made my stomach twist. When we walked through the front door, Mom was in the kitchen, her back turned to us as she stirred something on the stove. Dad was in the living room, his attention fixed on the TV. "Morning," Jack said casually, his voice light and easy, as if he hadn't just shared the most intimate night of his life with me. Mom glanced over her shoulder, her brow furrowing slightly. "Morning? It's almost noon. Where were you two last night?" Jack didn't miss a beat. "At a party," he said, his tone so convincing that even I almost believed it. Mom raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. "Well, I hope you didn't drink too much. There's leftover pancakes if you're hungry." I mumbled a quick thanks and headed upstairs, my heart pounding. Once I was safely in my room, I closed the door and leaned against it, letting out a shaky breath. We'd pulled it off. For now, at least. But as I sat down on my bed, the events of the night before replaying in my mind, I realized something. This wasn't just a fleeting moment, a one-time thing. What Jack and I had wasn't something that could be brushed aside or forgotten. And no matter what came next, I knew one thing for certain. I didn't want to let it go. The bathroom was quiet except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the rhythmic brushing of my toothbrush. My reflection stared back at me, eyes still a little hazy from the night before. My mind was replaying everything, his touch, his laugh, the way he looked at me as if I were the only thing that mattered. I hadn't realized how much time had passed until I saw him in the mirror, stepping into the bathroom behind me. "Jack," I mumbled through a mouthful of toothpaste, my words garbled and barely coherent. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned casually against the counter, his arms crossed, a playful smirk tugging at his lips. There was something in his eyes, something that made my stomach flip. "Rinse," he said, his voice low but firm, a command rather than a suggestion. I raised an eyebrow at him, the toothbrush still halfway to my mouth, but the look he gave me was enough to make me obey without question. I leaned forward, spat out the toothpaste, and rinsed my mouth, the cool water doing little to calm the warmth spreading through my chest. Before I had a chance to straighten up, he was there, his hands on either side of the sink, caging me in. His lips found mine, warm and insistent, and all the air seemed to leave my lungs. "Jack," I murmured against his mouth, but he silenced me with another kiss, deeper this time. His hand slid to my waist, pulling me closer as my back pressed against the cold edge of the sink. It was exhilarating and maddening all at once. The bathroom wasn't big, barely enough space for two people to move around comfortably. But at that moment, it felt like the entire world had shrunk to just us. He pulled back just enough to whisper, "Shower." I blinked up at him, my breath hitching. There was a challenge in his eyes, a playful daring that sent a shiver down my spine. Before I could overthink it, I nodded. The sound of the shower turning on filled the room, the sudden rush of water breaking the heavy silence. The steam rose quickly, curling around us like a veil as we stepped inside. The warm spray hit my skin, and I gasped softly, my back against the tiled wall. Jack didn't waste a second. His lips were on mine again, his hands roaming with a confidence that made my heart race. The water cascaded over us, washing away any lingering hesitation. It was intense, every kiss, every touch amplified by the heat of the water and the thrill of knowing we had to keep quiet. "Shit," he whispered against my ear when a soft gasp escaped my lips. His grin was mischievous, his fingers trailing down my arm. "You'll get us caught." The shower walls were slick with condensation, the mirror fogged up completely. It was like we were in our own little bubble, cut off from the rest of the world. For those few stolen moments, nothing else existed, no rules, no expectations, just us. When we finally stepped out, our skin warm and tingling, we were both grinning like idiots. My hair was a mess, water dripping down my face, and I couldn't stop giggling as Jack grabbed a towel and wrapped it around me, his touch lingering longer than necessary. "Think anyone hurt us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He shrugged, his grin widening. "If they did, they're not saying anything." We snuck out of the bathroom like a couple of kids who'd just gotten away with something forbidden, our hearts racing in tandem. My room was just down the hall, and once the door clicked shut behind us, I leaned against it, exhaling a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I trailed off, searching for the right words. "Fun," he offered, his eyes sparkling with mischief. I laughed, shaking my head. That's one way to put it. But it was more than fun. It was thrilling, intoxicating, and utterly terrifying all at once. Because this wasn't just some fleeting moment, some harmless flirtation. This was Jack, my brother, the boy I'd watched grow into the man now standing in front of me, towel slung over his shoulders, his hair damp and tousled. He wasn't just Jack anymore. He was something more, someone I couldn't imagine letting go of, even if I wanted to. And that's us now, sneaking around, stealing moments like thieves in the night, knowing full well that we're playing with fire, but unable to stop. I don't know where this is going or what it means for us, but for the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid to find out. Because when I'm with him, nothing else matters.